The restaurant went silent when the billionaire's black card was declined. It happened in a quiet little restaurant in Cedar Falls, Iowa, on a rainy Thursday evening. Victor Harrison, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the United States, stared at the payment terminal as the waiter tried his card for the second time. Declined. For a man whose companies were worth hundreds of millions of dollars, it should have been impossible. But Victor had no idea that this embarrassing moment was about to change his life forever. At a nearby table sat Grace Sullivan, a middle school teacher who had spent the entire day helping children with homework, calming a frightened student, and staying late to grade papers. She had only $27 in her checking account until payday, and she was carefully calculating whether she could afford dinner. When she noticed the embarrassed man reaching for another card, she quietly stood up and told the waiter she would cover his bill. Victor immediately looked at her in disbelief, but Grace simply smiled and said that everyone deserved a little kindness on a difficult day. If you believe that kindness can change someone's life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories. Grace had no idea who Victor was. To her, he was simply a tired-looking man in an expensive coat who seemed more embarrassed than angry. She didn't care about his watch, his car waiting outside, or the expensive restaurant. She cared that he looked like someone who needed a little dignity. She paid the bill with her debit card, watching nearly $40 disappear from the account she desperately needed for groceries. Victor thanked her, but Grace brushed it off. She gathered her coat and prepared to leave. Before she could walk away, Victor asked why she would spend money she clearly couldn't afford on a stranger. Grace hesitated before explaining that she had once been helped by a stranger when she was young. Her father had lost his job, her mother was sick, and there had been a week when her family had almost nothing to eat. A woman at a grocery store had quietly paid for their food without expecting anything in return. Grace had never forgotten that moment. She believed kindness was something you pass forward. Victor listened carefully, but he didn't tell her who he was. The next morning, Grace arrived at Hawthorne Middle School before sunrise. Her classroom was small and worn, with old books stacked against the wall and a heater that rattled whenever it turned on. She taught English, but her students often needed more than lessons. Some came to school hungry. Some struggled with problems at home. Some simply needed an adult who believed in them. One of those students was 12-year-old Noah Bennett, a quiet boy whose grades had suddenly fallen. Grace discovered that Noah's mother had been working 2 jobs after his father left. Noah often came to school without breakfast, and sometimes fell asleep at his desk. Grace began keeping granola bars in her desk and quietly checking on him every morning. She never knew that someone was watching. Victor had spent the night thinking about Grace. He had been researching the payment problem with his bank, but something bothered him more than the declined card. He couldn't forget the teacher who had spent her own money on a complete stranger. Victor had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Grace had wanted nothing. So he decided to find out who she was. What he discovered surprised him. Grace had been teaching for 11 years. She had turned down opportunities to move into administration because she preferred working directly with children. She donated school supplies whenever she could. She bought winter coats for students who couldn't afford them. She had even used part of her savings to create a small classroom library. Victor also learned that Grace was struggling financially. Her apartment rent had increased, her car needed repairs, and she had been quietly working weekend tutoring jobs to keep up with expenses. That evening, Victor arrived at the school. Grace recognized him immediately and assumed he had come to repay the restaurant bill. But Victor told her that wasn't why he was there. He introduced himself properly and revealed that he was the founder of Harrison Educational Holdings, a company that owned technology firms and several charitable foundations. Grace froze. The man whose bill she had paid was not simply a wealthy businessman. He was one of the richest people in the state. Grace felt embarrassed, thinking she had unknowingly treated a billionaire as if he were an ordinary customer. But Victor told her that was exactly why he had come. She had helped him without knowing his wealth, his reputation, or his name. Then Victor explained the truth about his declined card. His bank account had been temporarily frozen because of a security investigation involving fraudulent transactions. He could have called his private banking team and solved the problem within minutes. But he hadn't. He had wanted to see how people treated him when his money disappeared. Victor admitted that before meeting Grace, he had become suspicious of everyone around him. Employees praised him because they feared losing their jobs. Business partners smiled because they wanted contracts. Even people he called friends often asked for favors. Grace's simple act had reminded him of something he had forgotten. Wealth could buy comfort, but it could never buy genuine kindness. But Victor didn't simply repay her restaurant bill. Instead, he offered to fund a new student support program at Hawthorne Middle School, providing meals, school supplies, winter clothing, tutoring, and emergency assistance for struggling families. He also created a scholarship program for teachers who wanted to continue serving disadvantaged communities. Grace initially refused to accept anything personally. Victor respected her decision and made sure the money went directly toward the students. Months passed, and the school began to change. Noah's grades improved. He stopped falling asleep in class because he was finally receiving regular meals. Other students received computers and books. Teachers received resources they had desperately needed for years. One afternoon, Grace found a letter waiting on her desk. It was from Victor. He wrote that the night his card was declined, he had believed he had lost control of his life. But a schoolteacher with $27 in her bank account had shown him that the most valuable thing a person could possess was not money. It was the willingness to help someone when nobody was watching. Grace read the letter twice, tears filling her eyes. She remembered the woman who had once paid for her family's groceries. She realized that one small act of kindness had traveled through the years and eventually reached a billionaire sitting alone in a restaurant. And Victor realized something even more powerful. Sometimes the people with the least money are the ones who understand the true meaning of generosity. Years later, Victor continued visiting Hawthorne Middle School. He never arrived with cameras or reporters. He simply walked through the hallways, greeted the teachers, and sat with students during lunch. Grace remained in her classroom, still teaching, still helping children, and still carrying the same belief she had held since childhood. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe. You never know how one small act of compassion might change someone's life. And before you go, comment, kindness always comes back, if you believe that even the smallest good deed can create a chain reaction of hope. Because Grace paid a stranger's bill that rainy evening expecting nothing in return. She didn't know he was a billionaire. She didn't know his card had been declined because of a financial security problem. She didn't know her $40 decision would eventually change an entire school. She only knew that someone needed help. And sometimes, that is all the reason a good heart needs. The world may remember Victor Harrison for the billions he made, but the moment he remembered most was the night a schoolteacher with almost nothing left chose to give something anyway.